told me who she was. I cannot tell you how I regret that she should have died in consequence of her love of me." Mr Benson looked up at him again, a stern light filling his eyes as he did so. He waited impatiently to hear more, either to quench or confirm his suspicions. If she had not been lying there, very still and calm, he would have forced the words out of Mr Donne by some abrupt question. As it was, he listened silently, his heart quick beating. "I know that money is but a poor compensation, is no remedy for this event, or for my youthful folly." Mr Benson set his teeth hard together to keep in words little short of a curse. "Indeed, I offered her money to almost any amount before. Do me justice, sir," catching the gleam of indignation on Mr Benson's face. "I offered to marry her, and provide for the boy as if he had been legitimate. It's of no use recurring to that time," said he, his voice faltering. "What is done cannot be undone. But I came now to say that I should be glad to leave the boy still under your charge, and that every expense you think it right to incur in his education I will gladly defray, and place a sum of money in trust for him, say £2,000 or more, fix what you will. Of course, if you decline retaining him, I must find some one else, but the provision for him shall be the same, for my poor Ruth's sake." Mr Benson did not speak. He could not, till he had gathered some peace from looking at the ineffable repose of the dead. Then, before he answered, he covered up her face, and in his voice there was the stillness of ice. "Leonard is not unprovided for. Those that honoured his mother will take care of him. He shall never touch a penny of your money. Every offer of service you have made, I reject in his name, and in her presence," said he, bending towards the dead. "Men may call such actions as yours youthful follies. There is another name for them with God. Sir, I will follow you downstairs." All the way down, Mr Benson heard Mr Donne's voice urging and entreating, but the words he could not recognise for the thoughts that filled his brain, the rapid putting together of events that was going on there; and when Mr Donne turned at the door to speak again, and repeat his offers of service to Leonard, Mr Benson made answer, without well knowing whether the answer fitted the question or not. "I thank God, you have no right, legal or otherwise, over the child, and, for her sake, I will spare him the shame of ever hearing your name as his father." He shut the door in Mr Donne's face. "An ill-bred, puritanical old fellow. He may have the boy, I am sure, for aught I care. I have done my duty, and will get out of this abominable place as soon as I can. I wish my last remembrance of my beautiful Ruth was not mixed up with all these people." Mr Benson was bitterly oppressed with this interview. It disturbed the peace with which he was beginning to contemplate events. His anger ruffled him, although such anger had been just and such indignation well deserved, and both had been unconsciously present in his heart for years against the unknown seducer, whom he met face to face by the deathbed of Ruth. It gave him a shock which he did not recover from for many days. He was nervously afraid lest Mr Donne should appear at the funeral, and not all the reasons he alleged to himself against this apprehension put it utterly away from him. Before then, however, he heard casually, for he would allow himself no inquiries, that he had left the town. No, Ruth's funeral passed over in calm and simple solemnity. Her child, her own household, her friend and Mr Farquhar, quietly walked after the bier, which was borne by some of the poor to whom she had been very kind in her lifetime, and many others stood aloof in the little burying ground, sadly watching that last ceremony. They slowly dispersed, Mr Benson leading Leonard by the hand, and secretly wondering at his self-restraint. almost as soon as they had let themselves into the chapel house, a messenger brought a note from Mrs Bradshaw, with a pot of quince marmalade, which, she said to Miss Benson, she thought that Leonard might fancy; and if he did, they were to be sure and let her know, as she had plenty more. Or was there anything else that he would like? She would gladly make him whatever he fancied. Poor Leonard! He lay stretched on the sofa, white and tearless, beyond the power of any such comfort, however kindly offered. But this was only one of the many homely, simple attentions which all came round to him to offer, from Mr Grey, the rector, down to the nameless poor who called at the back door to inquire how it fared with her child. Mr Benson was anxious, according to dissenting custom, to preach an appropriate funeral sermon. It was the last office he could render to her. It should be done well and carefully. Moreover, it was possible that the circumstances of her life, which were known to all, might be made effective in this manner to work conviction of many truths. Accordingly, he made great preparation of thought and paper. He laboured hard, destroying sheet after sheet, his eyes filling with tears between whiles, as he remembered some fresh proof of the humility and sweetness of her life. Oh, that he could do her justice! But words seemed hard and inflexible, and refused to fit themselves to his ideas. He sat late on Saturday, writing. He watched through the night till Sunday morning was far advanced. He had never taken such pains with any sermon, and he was only half satisfied with it after all. Mrs Farquhar had comforted the bitterness of Sally's grief by giving her very handsome mourning. At any rate, she felt oddly proud and exulting when she thought of her new black gown; but when she remembered why she wore it, she scolded herself pretty sharply for her satisfaction, and took to crying afresh with redoubled vigour. She spent the Sunday morning in alternately smoothing down her skirts and adjusting her broad-hemmed collar, or bemoaning the occasion with tearful earnestness. But the sorrow overcame the little quaint vanity of her heart, as she saw troop after troop of humbly dressed mourners pass by into the old chapel. They were very poor, but each had mounted some rusty piece of crape, or some faded black ribbon. The old came halting and slow; the mothers carried their quiet, awestruck babes. And not only these were there, but others, equally unaccustomed to nonconformist worship. Mr Davis, for instance, to whom Sally acted as chaperone, for he sat in the minister's pew as a stranger, and, as she afterwards said, she had a fellow feeling with him, being a churchwoman herself, and dissenters had such awkward ways. However, she had been there before, so she could set him to rights about their fashions. From the pulpit, Mr Benson saw one and all, the well-filled Bradshaw pew, all in deep mourning. Mr Bradshaw conspicuously so. He would have attended the funeral gladly if they would have asked him. The Farquhars, the many strangers, the still more numerous poor, one or two wild-looking outcasts, who stood afar off, but wept silently and continually. Mr Benson's heart grew very full. His voice trembled as he read and prayed, but he steadied it as he opened his sermon, his great last effort in her honour, the labour that he had prayed God to bless to the hearts of many. For an instant the old man looked on all the upturned faces, listening with wet eyes to hear what he could say to interpret that which was in their hearts, dumb and unshaped, of God's doings, as shown in her life. He looked, and as he gazed, a mist came before him, and he could not see his sermon, nor his hearers, but only Ruth, as she had been, stricken low, and crouching from sight, in the upland field by Llandew, like a woeful, hunted creature. And now her life was over, her struggle ended. Sermon and all was forgotten. He sat down, and hid his face in his hands for a minute or so. Then he arose, pale and serene.